Hey, I am very excited for tonight's episode, and let me tell you why, because we are doing something I have never done before. I think I've spoken about it a little bit on the channel, maybe not, but this past year I made much more of a concerted effort to see movies, and I saw way more than I usually do. So as kind of a capstone to that, I'm going to do something I literally have never done on this channel and rank all 52-ish movies I saw last year. This year I'm shooting for 72. Before we get into it, a couple of general things I want to say. One, I am not a film critic, I am not an expert, I am none of those things. I am ranking these movies based on my personal enjoyment. I'm not trying to find some kind of objective quality standard by which to judge all these movies. So, just bear that in mind. You may hear some rankings you don't agree with. Two, I'm going to try and get as deep into my discussions of these movies without spoilers as possible, but at times I may need to spoil them. And if I need to, I'm going to put a notice and let you know a bunch of times before we do so that you can just skip to the next entry on the list if you want. Three, note that most of the movies I saw this year were good and above. I only saw like 3 or 4 movies that I thought were just decent, and only a couple that I thought were actually mid or bad. So most of this list is me trying to rank movies that are good or great. So bear that in mind when there are some movies that I gush over that are maybe a little low. The editor, which is me, roll the list of all the movies I saw this year. So here they are so that you know I'm going to present them in alphabetical order here in the scroll. We're going to go through them all. I'm going to start with the lowest one and go all the way up to the highest one. So yeah, let's get started.
Everybody's going to bed and sleep and we're up all night. Instead, games and movies are our sweet reveries. We present 3 a.m. soliloquy.
Alright, so starting off strong or weak, all the way at the bottom, surprising nobody, War of the Worlds. We're not going to spend that much time on this one, there's not a whole lot to say. It's not even a movie, not really, it's more like a clip show. Like an amateur video editor could make something more interesting than this. I am not kidding, I've literally seen better stories and more interesting videography in TikTok shorts than I did in this movie. Everything about this is cheap. The music, the dialogue, the special effects. The director of this movie, Rich Lee, he was known for making music videos, which makes the kind of cut and paste approach of the movie make a lot more sense. And to his credit, he's worked with tons of huge stars in the music industry, so I can see why they thought maybe he would be a good pick to make the jump from music video director to film director. But apparently his expertise just didn't translate very well. And for those who don't know, War of the Worlds was originally a radio broadcast, right? So it was like you were experiencing the events that were being described vicariously through a single point of contact, which was the radio. So I guess they were trying to emulate that, except instead of a radio, it's like a computer monitor. So they're trying to update the concept, bring it into the 21st century. And that's cool. That's a cool idea. But I mean, they just really fumbled the bag, specifically with script writing and acting especially, and plot contrivances out the wazoo. And above all, it's been said so many times, but like, why was this just an extended Amazon commercial? This was the only awful movie I watched this year, and the only reason I watched it was because so many people were talking about it that I got hit with some FOMO, and I had to check it out on that basis. I have this running theory that movies like this, terrible movies with like explicit anti-big government pro-worker messaging, are actually a psyop to get the general public to associate things like working class solidarity and anti-government surveillance with shitty movies, and will therefore make the public think that those things are bad by association with these movies. Alright, at number 51 we got A Working Man. Not bad, but mid for sure. If you ask most action movie fans, they'll tell you that if you've seen one Jason Statham regular Joe movie, then you've seen them all. But that's not really true, is it? Because some of them are big, fun, over-the-top action spectacles, and others are this. One thing that was really important to me trying to make this list was to judge all the movies the way they wanted to be judged, right? Like you wouldn't judge an action movie the way you would judge a drama or a romance or a comedy. All these movies want to be different things. And an action movie wants to be big and loud and fun and punchy. It's not necessarily supposed to be like a great character piece or a showcase for amazing acting or anything like that. So the question is, how good of an action movie was this movie? So in this movie, Jason Statham is ex-Marine Levon Cade, and he's tasked with rescuing the daughter of his boss, Joe Garcia, before she can be trafficked off by her Russian kidnapper. It's about as textbook as a setup as you can have with a Taken-type movie, but what makes those kind of movies fun is the action, and unfortunately this film is really stingy with it in the first half. No, bizarrely, instead we spend the first half focusing on things like interrogation, espionage, tracking, leveraging, connection, things you'd expect from a thriller, like a more intellectual type movie, but unfortunately there's not a whole lot happening in the plot here to make that interesting. In fact, we really don't get a big, huge, explosive set piece until the very end, and by that point, the type of people who are watching this movie have already mentally checked out of it. It's not the worst action movie ever, but if you want to watch a better movie that is exactly like this, just put on Beekeeper instead. Way more fun, shit starts blowing up in the first 10 minutes, and it deals with a villain that is very real for many of us, which is scammers preying on the elderly. I.e., you can really start feeling good when Jason Statham blows people up in that one. Coming in at number 50 is Him. Not the worst movie I saw this year, but easily, far and away, the most disappointing. And it kills me to say that because y'all have no idea how excited I was for this one. And it's not the actors' faults. The casting was good, the performances were good, and in a better movie, they would have killed it, I'm sure. Where the movie faltered was purely on the idea level, or rather, the lack of idea. And I can't talk about my issues with this movie without spoiling it, so just know I thought it was mediocre, not great, not terrible, but disappointing. So this movie had two really big issues. The first one being it didn't do enough with its premise. See, the idea was so good. With a football horror film, there's so much you could deal with CTE and violence as entertainment and fan and mascot culture as like this form of cult-like worship, and the trailer seemingly promised all of these things. It was my favorite trailer that I saw last year. Then the movie comes out and it's like, hey, remember all those fun ideas we showed you in the trailer? Yeah, about 80% of them are gonna just be hallucinations. Sorry. And also, all of the scary moments you saw in the trailer, that's all the scary moments in the whole movie. Like, you guys remember the shot of the scary mascot dragging the hatchet through the desert? That was my favorite shot of the trailer because it conjured all these questions in my head, like, is the mascot even human under there? Like, is it some kind of patron deity where you have to perform this occult ritual to summon it for the team? You have to appease it? Its true nature underneath the costume is unknown? That kind of thing? I'm actually putting you on game. I'm actually giving you more ideas than the movie did. That's even more of a tease because the movie itself seems to suggest it is going to deal with this, with the mascot doing that weird dance in the locker room at the beginning. With any horror movie, the number one thing you want to see, and you're going to see me bring this up a lot throughout this video, is you want to see it take its premise to the logical extreme, as far as it can go, explore all the nooks and crannies. But pretty much the only thing they went into was the idea of cult obsession. They have these crazy fans that worship Marlon Wayans' character as like this god, basically. And they deal with that for 5 minutes and then it's done. And that brings me to number 2, which is that the things that it did do, it didn't set you up for at all. So if you don't know, the basic premise is that Cameron Cade is like the number 1 draft pick for the NFL. He's going to go out for the San Antonio Saviors, and he's trying to replace Isaiah White, who's been their QB for a while, but he's getting old and now they're looking to pass the torch, basically. And so Isaiah White reaches out to Cam, but not before Cam has this traumatic head injury that's inflicted on him in the night. So now he's at risk of CTE if he plays, basically. So the choice that he has to make is essentially, do I keep playing and potentially get CTE, or do I stop now and let myself rest and let this opportunity pass me by? And spoiler alert, he chooses to play because the movie has to happen, and they never address the CTE in the movie again outside of that one shot in the trailer. Okay. And so eventually we find out that the source of Isaiah White's playing ability is this like beast blood that's been passed down through QBs, and that's what makes him so strong and fast. And I like that. I like the idea that there's this non-human entity that's behind the team's success that bestows its blood onto them. So then Cam, who's now infused with the blood himself, is forced to engage Isaiah in ritualistic combat to determine whether or not he's fit to take up the mantle, basically. And as they're fighting, you start to notice that things seem to be a little bit Mandingo-ish. When Cam wins, he is lifted up onto the football field that we saw in all the posters in the trailer. And this is where the movie decides to spring a racial component onto you. Yes, the team owners present him with the opportunity to sign with the Saviors, and it turns out that they are actually very racist and are just these rich white owners who are kind of co-opting the success and struggles of black people to stay rich. And don't get me wrong, that's a real thing, but it had nothing to do with the rest of the movie. The rest of the movie was not about this at all. So instead of signing the contract, he picks up the sword that's out there for some reason and decides to slaughter all of the team owners and Isaiah White's creepy wife. And the scene looks very cool visually, which actually is another good thing I can say about the movie, is that it looks awesome. Every shot, every scene is really nicely crafted. But I don't care how cool the sword scene is if it's not earned or built up to in any way. If you wanted to do the racial thing, lead us there instead of tacking it on in the last 10 minutes. My God, it's so jarring it drags the rest of the movie down, which the rest of the movie already wasn't that good, so sorry if you were looking forward to this one, the way I was. Well, at least we can't blame Peele for this. Yes, in spite of what all the marketing would have you believe, Peele did not direct this movie, he just produced it. Here's the guy you should blame. At number 49, remember I said these were my subjective takes, we have Die, My Love. So here's the thing. If you're going to judge art in any capacity, even as a small-time goober with a teeny tiny channel like me, it is really important that you know what your strengths and weaknesses, i.e. your biases and preferences, are. I'm talking about things that you struggle to appreciate no matter how good they are. For me in video games, it's roguelikes and bullet hells, but in movies, it is when something is slow-paced. I have a really hard time when things are slow. Slow getting in is one thing, I can deal with that, but when we're just crawling along in silence the whole time, snooze city. That said, it would seem that a lot of my fellow moviegoers struggle with the same thing, because the audience score for this one was not very good. But I want to stress, and this is why I'm saying all this, the movie itself is not bad. In fact, I think it's actually kind of effective in what it's trying to do. Jennifer Lawrence and Rob Pattinson star as Grace and Jackson. Jackson's father has recently died, and so this Montana couple is now moving into his house. They have a baby, and Grace is forced to stay at home and take care of it while Jackson is on the road all the time working as a trucker. So the main thing of this movie is that Grace develops PPD and eventually psychosis as a result of being cooped up in the house all the time because she's a free spirit and she can't live like that. Now again, I want to stress this is not a bad movie. The acting is phenomenal and the tension between Grace and Jackson is palpable and feels like it could snap and explode apart at any moment. But see, that's the thing, it never actually does. Instead, it's a bunch of smaller passive-aggressive maneuvers. They cheat on each other, they snipe, Jackson buys a dog even though Grace has been asking for a cat, they blame, they argue, they point fingers, but there's never any big moment of status quo change, not really. There's smaller moments where the tension comes to head, like Grace smashes herself through a screen door or destroys the bathroom. But even these things, which would prompt an enormous relationship reevaluation in real life, don't change anything in this movie. But as I was sitting down and cobbling my thoughts together for this video, I thought to myself, well, maybe that's the point that Lynn Ramsey was trying to get across. Maybe the point is that there is no big, explosive, dramatic breaking point for most people. It's just a bunch of small, tiny inconveniences that gradually break you down until you can't take it anymore. Where the film was really effective was getting the viewer in the mind of Grace, but it made me ask the question, how do you make a movie about repetition and monotony without making a movie that is repetitive and monotonous? I did actually get an answer to that question in the form of another movie on this list. We'll talk about that later. So again, not a bad movie, and I do feel a little bad putting it this low on the list because the acting in it's really good. It just wasn't for me. Number 48, Captain America Brave New World. Know this, I am an MCU apologist, which means I believe the vast majority of the stuff that came after Endgame is not nearly as bad as y'all claim it is. That doesn't mean I don't have some sense of objectivity, okay? So, while I don't hate this movie, I also don't think it's great. Most people know the story of this one. It has to do with Sam Wilson, who has recently inherited the mantle of Captain America, chasing after a covert threat to US national security. Personally, as a big comic book guy, I was very excited to see the leader in a movie, especially since we set him up all the way back in the OG Incredible Hulk movie in 2008. But the single biggest thing that hurt this movie, and this is a very popular take, was the Red Hulk reveal in the trailer. And I'm not saying this is a thing of like, oh, you should have a surprise popular character make a cameo at the end of your movie to get people to want to watch it. That's not what I'm saying. I'm saying that the movie set it up like it was something surprising, something that the movie was building up to, but we weren't sure where it was going. But we all knew because the primary way that they advertised this movie was with the Red Hulk. I mean, this would have been like if in the original trailer for Winter Soldier had just been Arnim Zola spilling the beans on modern day Hydra. Still, it's an MCU movie, so there are things in it that you'll get that are MCU quality, you know, like fun action and solid visual effects and decent acting. Now, I'm not going to make this a whole MCU thing. I do a separate video for that, but I will put my two biggest criticisms of the current state of the MCU out there. One is that superhero fatigue is real, whether y'all want to admit it or not. Historically, when any type of art or formula has been done to death, people are going to move away from it because we as humans value novelty and originality and freshness in our work. Once again, I feel compelled to mention the dialectical miniseries I did a while back about this very topic. But my point is, a lot of these movies that are getting panned now, had they come out, 10 years ago, people would be eating them up. And two is that Marvel has de-emphasized crossovers immensely. And those big crossovers were what got a lot of people excited about the MCU. It felt fun to watch the pieces come together. I mean, if you look at the past few years, Moon Knight, Shang-Chi, She-Hulk, Ironheart, Sam Wilson, the list goes on. Eternals, The Black Knight, none of these pieces that have been set up over the past 6 years have been put together for a substantive crossover yet, with the notable exception of Thunderbolts, which is also on this list, and The Marvel. So yeah, decent movie, not horrible, step above mid, step below good. 47, Megan 2.0. Was it as good as the first one? No. Was it fun? Did I enjoy watching it? Absolutely. The big thing that perplexed a lot of people with this film was the genre pivot from kind of the slasher comedy of the first one to more of an action comedy thing with this one. Pivoting from horror to action is not rare. Plenty of movies have done it. The prime example is Alien. But granted, the first one also kind of had a fairly nuanced conversation about artificial intelligence and its role in child rearing, which I don't know if the filmmakers knew when they made that movie how topical that was going to become in the year 2025. And yeah, a lot of that nuance was not there in the sequel, and maybe that disappointed people. And this one also picked up a few superhero conventions, which also maybe threw people off. They also show a lot of the movie in the trailer, like most of it, like almost all of it. It's like, she's coming back. Why are we beating around the bush about it? I get we have to build up to the point where the family is willing to accept her again. And actually, that whole sequence gave us some of the coolest moments in the film to me, but, I will echo sentiments that this sequel doesn't need to exist, but it's Blumhouse. What do you expect? What could broadly be said about many sequels? That's the thing about sequels. You can't say you don't want one until you have it, because if you didn't have it, there would be a lot of people asking for it. You see what I mean? It's like a catch-22 situation. I mean, The Incredibles is the biggest example I can think of. How many years were we chomping on the bit for that sequel, and then how many people were disappointed when it came out? Yeah. Number 46, Friendship. I will say, of all the movies that came out this year, this one was one of the most surprising in terms of how it unfolded. My wife and I saw this one together, and we were late because I drove us to the wrong location by accident, so maybe if we'd gotten there on time, we would have had a more seamless experience. But as it stands, this movie was fucking strange. What starts off as this sort of meet-cute between socially inept Craig Waterman and his super cool neighbor Austin Carmichael eventually descended into this surrealist caper that at times felt more like a drama or thriller than a comedy. Don't get me wrong, it was a good movie. It actually was. It was just weird. Like, at times it felt like I was watching a more comedic Barry, especially with how much the plot revolved around the idea of this potentially dangerous person becoming obsessed and escalating things. And I think that if they'd leaned harder into that and marketed it as like a thriller comedy, I would have liked the movie better. As far as cringe comedy goes, you'd be hard-pressed to watch something that would make you cringe harder than this. And when it comes to that form of comedy, you either like it or you don't. Number 46, we have Good Boy. Regardless of where this movie falls in my rankings, I hope that it gets all of the support and community uplifting in the future because of the extent to which the filmmakers went to make this thing happen. Ben Leonberg, he's the director. His actual dog, Indy, is the star of the film. And he and his wife, over the course of 3 years, painstakingly filmed this movie themselves with a crew of I think 5 people. And it was really cool because after I saw this movie, they rolled like a behind the scenes tape right there in the theater where you got to see how a lot of it was put together. And I thought that was really charming. The premise of dog and owner in haunted house is a fun one, and especially from the point of view of the dog, which could initially seem gimmicky. Like, I thought that they were going to tape a GoPro to the dog, but that's not what they did. Instead, they did things like showing the owner from low angles, or showing angles underneath the bed or the cabinet or other places you wouldn't be able to see from a human perspective, rather than just using the GoPro. The premise itself is fine, but it's the way that it plays with haunted house tropes in a way that is specific to a dog that elevates this movie. I'm going to give a spoiler warning here for this one, so this is your cue to go on if you want. It is well known that dogs have almost like a sixth sense when it comes to sensing things wrong with people, and that's why a lot of folks will get service dogs to help alert them to things that might be going on internally that they're not aware of. And playing on that, the whole basic thing of this movie is that the owner is dealing with some kind of hereditary illness. The dad dealt with it before him, and now him. And so the big thing of the movie is it a ghost, or is it just a disease that's being passed down? Like, is the house haunted, or is this family just haunted by this disease? A lot of horror movies are doing this thing now, where they pick this monster, this entity that represents something very real, and then a lot of the movie is this tug of war between whether it's a monster or just an actual thing that people have dealt with in real life. So anyway, good movie. It was just slow paced for me, and not a whole lot happened, so that's what prevented me from putting it higher on this list. At number 44, we got the new SpongeBob movie, The Search for SquarePants. You will meet many a detractor of modern SpongeBob. Not me. I will say I don't think the movie's animation is bad, but I didn't find it as appealing as the other animated movies on this list. Still, Clancy Brown, Tom Kenny, and Roger Bumpus have been consistently giving, in my opinion, some of the best and most definitive voice performances in cartoon history for quite some years now. The big thing I liked about this movie was that it showed SpongeBob and Mr. Krabs being buddies again, which isn't something we've consistently seen since like season 2. Mr. Krabs has become the biggest op of the show, even more so than Plankton depending on the episode. But originally, if you recall, Mr. Krabs was a mentor to SpongeBob, and it was nice to see that element get brought back again. And of course, I am, as many people my age are, biased hugely towards SpongeBob. There were also some surprisingly creative decisions made with creature designs, which maybe that shouldn't surprise me. The creatures in the first SpongeBob movie were pretty cool too. So all I gotta say, if you're a fan of SpongeBob, you'll probably like this. Number 43, The Running Man, the first Stephen King adaptation on this list, but certainly not the last. The highest praise I can give this movie is that it looks absolutely gorgeous. The gritty cyberpunk aesthetic, the color palette, the costumes, everything was just eye-popping. Not to mention, to complement the movie's very overt, like revolutionary social themes, they also use this zine aesthetic at several points in the film, which I thought really lent to the sort of like urban, street-level working class quality that they were going for. Not to mention the handling of this dystopian fascist state where the state itself controls the flow of information, which is rapidly becoming not science fiction anymore. Josh Brolin, Glenn Powell, and Coleman Domingo all played their characters really well, with just a lot of flair and panache, and like the perfect level of over the top to make it feel kind of like comic book-esque almost. And it complemented the whole thing just having this sense of grandiosity and enormity. I just wish that the actual screenplay had borne that sense of grandiosity out. Like, if this is the level of stylization of this film, I would say this is about the level of quantity of action scenes. Don't get me wrong, the action scenes that are here are good. I just think that there should have been more of them for a movie like this. The biggest visual comparison I drew was the newer Wolfenstein games, especially Glenn Powell. I think he looked just like BJ Blazkowicz. So yeah, this movie did have some problems. Not perfect by any means, but it didn't deserve to flop the way it did. Number 42, the new Spike Lee joint, Highest to Lowest. There are people who will tell you this movie is dog shit. Absolute boo-boo. I disagree. The primary reason this movie isn't higher up on the list is because it just starts off, almost lifeless compared to what it gives us later. If you didn't know, this is actually a remake of an Akira Kurosawa police procedural that de-emphasizes the police procedural aspect and instead chooses to focus on Denzel Washington's character David King and his relationships with his family and the community around him. The standout parts of this movie are Jeffrey Wright and A$AP Rocky, both of whom are great. I already loved Jeffrey Wright as an actor, I continue to. But A$AP Rocky really surprised me in this movie with how convincing he was. He was probably the most convincing part of a film that definitely had some less than stellar acting. The first half has some rough performances, the pacing is all over the place, it's just not great. But then, once the second half hits and they go out into the city in search of the hostage and the money that Denzel tried to use to get the hostage back, the whole thing turns into, a completely different movie. We get this really creative use of the natural rhythms of a city, like people chanting on a train, matching up with the background music of the film, that kind of thing. We use all these vignettes and filters to capture the spirit of the boogie down Bronx, as it's called. And we get even a nice 10-minute tribute to the late great salsa pianist Eddie Palmieri, who recently passed. This movie also did something with hip-hop and rap that I've never seen done before, where two characters have a conversation and they're talking to each other, but they're also like rapping at each other. So it's like they're using rap as a form of communication. This movie just did a lot of really interesting things with the culture in its second half, and I hate that the first half dragged it down so much that a lot of people are just not gonna watch it, and I can't even really be mad at him. That thrumming spirit of life and culture that was there in the second half would have been there in the first. This movie would be way higher on this list. But still, Spike used it to say a lot of very poignant things about the world, AI versus art, and issues within the black community, so it's a little higher up. At number 41 is Drop, which I think is also a Blumhouse movie. Fact check, editor. I feel like a lot of the movies I saw this year were focused on distilling emotions like fear, anxiety, and stress into visual form. And there's all kinds of things you can make a viewer do to feel those things. Ultra close-ups on gross stuff, overlapping dialogue, unpleasant sounds, but one of the most common ways to do it is gaslighting. I've said it before and I'm going to say it a bunch more on this channel. Gaslighting is the root of so much of modern horror. The premise of this one is that the recently widowed Violet Gates is getting back out there again, so she goes on a blind date to a fancy restaurant and leaves her young kid in the care of her sister. But it turns out that her blind date actually has some important incriminating evidence of some political players in the city, and so someone in that restaurant is basically airdropping her instructions on how to kill him. And she's got limited time to figure out who it is, and if she tries to alert anyone in the restaurant to what's going on, the airdropper will send a kill message to the gunman that he has stationed outside the house with her sister and baby. So she's in a rough spot, and it's a really effective, intense premise for a movie. In fact, this is a really effective movie in a lot of ways. Like, the fact that it's number 41 might make you think that I don't like it, but remember, most of the movies on this list are good to great. Most of this film plays out like a bottle movie almost, because it takes place inside of the restaurant, and a lot of the intrigue is trying to figure out who it is that's sending these airdrops. And we get to know a lot of the characters in the restaurant pretty damn well by the time the credits roll. Like, you get really involved with the background characters. That's the thing about this movie, is the setting. The setting is gorgeous. And you, like Violet, are trying to figure out who the hell is sending these airdrops. Like, the way the drops are presented in the film on screen is meant to mirror how they're being presented to Violet as this ever-present looming threat. It's all really good stuff. Like, this is a great movie. But there is one reason why it's not higher, and it is the ending. After all of the amazing atmospheric building that this movie does, the ending is just so goofy. And spoiler warning, so skip ahead if you don't want to hear about it. So after she's dealt with the airdrop at the restaurant, she drives back home fast as she can to deal with the gunman before he can get her sister and her child. And just from there, it just devolves into Looney Tunes. The sister gets shot, I think, like twice at least. You get this nice, very tense scene with Violet sneaking around the house trying to hide from the gunman. At this point, you think the sister's dead. You're not sure if the child's still alive or not. It's really good stuff. And then the child drives a toy truck to Violet with a gun, an actual gun in it, which she uses to defeat the gunman, and then it turns out that the sister is actually completely fine from the gunshot wounds, and she's just in the hospital getting patched up. It's not my favorite. So yeah, this is an example of a movie where it was awesome the whole way through, and then the ending just really kind of jumped the shark. Number 40, The Gorge. You're gonna find this to be a common theme with me. A lot of these movies took too long getting in for my liking, but once this one got in, holy hell did it get going. In this objectively very silly action, sci-fi, horror, romance movie, you have these two super assassins from the East and the West who are both tasked with guarding opposite ends of this giant chasm that they call the Gorge. Or rather, they're trying to prevent what's in it from coming out. Now, you may have guessed this from the brief description I just gave. This movie pivots a lot through a lot of genres. One minute you're watching like a political thriller, the next you're watching an action movie, the next you're watching like a meet-cute romance rom-com situation. This movie does a lot of things in its relatively short runtime. Now, to talk about how the movie gets good, I have to spoil it. So if you're looking for a general impression before you skip on, just know, solid action movie, just know that there's some horror elements, so if you're squeamish, maybe stay away from this one. So these two people, I mean, they're lonely, they're horny, they're both good looking, so they fall in love, they rendezvous on one side of the gorge, and then when Miles Teller's character tries to go back to the other side, he falls in, Anya Taylor-Joy jumps in after him, and now they are in the gorge, and this is where things really start to get interesting. They encounter all kinds of crazy monsters and ghouls. They stumble upon this big government conspiracy. They have to try and get out before they die. It's a really good time. It's a lot of fun. The two biggest issues I have with this movie are as follows. One, this movie does some showing, but it does a lot of telling in the first half hour. A lot of exposition dumps to catch us up on what's going on. And two, man, the first like 15-20 minutes of this movie are absolutely nothing. They are essentially just there to show us that these two people are lonely and in some amount of emotional distress, which they could have shown us in 5 or 10, half the time. This is not a smart movie by any means, but man is it fun and really, really, really cool. The practical effects and the sets and the creature designs are awesome. They all look terrific. And the soundtrack, which was written by Trent Reznor, is amazing. Like, the soundtrack was better than this movie deserved, straight up. So yeah, all in all, fun time. Turn your brain off and enjoy the ride, and maybe skip the first 15 minutes. At number 39, the only movie on here that my wife asked me to go see without her was Clown in a Cornfield. This one, like many others on this list, is based on a book, which she has read, and that's why she asked me to see it. And that was fun because I came home and we were able to compare the two and talk about the differences. Clown in a Cornfield, if you are unaware, is both a deconstruction of the slasher genre and also just a very solid, fun slasher movie in and of itself. Now, if you don't want spoilers, you can just stop right there and go on to the next one. If you like slashers, you'll probably like this movie. It's a very typical setup. A small town, close-knit townsfolk, and they have these weird traditions, and there's disappearances going on, something weird's happening, that sort of thing. Now, there's two things that this film does that set it apart from others in the genre. One being that the kids have to be convinced that there's a slasher, because they stage slasher encounters as part of their web series, so it's almost like a Scream meta kind of thing. And two is that the big twist, which is again very much like Scream, is that there are many clowns. It's an entire cult of clowns. It's not just one. They take out the first clown and a bunch more come out of the cornfield, which is a very fun reveal. There's a lot of twists and turns in this movie, and also, of course, some generational social commentary thrown in for good measure. The practical effects are great, the kills are fun, the characters are well written. What more could you want from a movie like this? If you haven't seen it and you're a fan of slasher films, you should check it out. Number 38, Jurassic World Rebirth. This might not be saying much, but I'm still going to say it because it's true. This is the best Jurassic Park movie that we've had in over a decade. Granted, they mostly achieved that by largely redoing the setting and progression of the OG movie, but who cares? It was fun. It was mostly Mahershala Ali and Scarlett Johansson, both of whom I love, who carried this movie, unsurprisingly. But the dino effects were really good. I'm not sure how many of them were practical, probably none, but everything looked good. And it was nice to get back to the series' roots in a location where the dinos are in control, rather than a location filled with humans that they are invading like it has been for the past few years. This movie even comes equipped with the sensitive naturalist archetype to help us, the viewer, feel more tenderly towards the dinos. Some may balk at its heavy-handed approach to social themes, but people have already proven they can't understand subtlety, so who cares? My biggest issue with this movie, once again, as many movies on this list, has to do with the trailer. The whole gimmick of this movie is that we're going to this island where they were experimenting with gene splicing, which means that there are mutant dinos on this island. But when we get there, we only see 2 varieties of mutant dinosaur, both of which were heavily featured in the marketing. So there are absolutely no surprises on this island that we were promised was going to be full of surprises. The designs they came up with were cool. Like, I love the Distortus Rex. I think that thing is awesome, but that's it. So my advice is, if you haven't seen the last few movies, don't. Just watch this one and call it a day. Number 37, Heads of State. One of the most fun, dumb action movies I saw this year. If you just want pure, fun, over-the-top action comedy, this will not disappoint you. Idris Elba and John Cena star opposite each other as the British Prime Minister and the US President, respectively. And they are forced into an uneasy partnership by, you guessed it, the Russians. It's just so funny to me that Russians are the morally acceptable ethnic villains now. There's a few things that really made this movie work for me. One, the action and set pieces and cinematography were so big and over the top and explosive, like it reminded me of the Uncharted game. My brother joked that this movie was a better Uncharted movie than the actual Uncharted movie, but I mean, it's not really a joke, it was. Two, there were a lot of really creative action sequences. My favorite is this one with Jack Quaid, where his character is like this hacker guy, and he's able to use this gadget to see the bad guys in other rooms and then attack them through the walls. Jack Quaid had a good year with action. More on that later. And three, there were these really fun, like almost Wes Anderson-ish montages that were meant to sum up a bunch of crazy events for us, the viewer. This movie had a lot of personality for something so kind of, I guess, silly and maybe generic. Like obviously the US president is a pastiche of our country and the history of the leadership that we've had here. But somehow he manages to be better than the majority of our current political leader. He points out at a pretty critical juncture in the film that the villains aren't necessarily really the villains. They're kind of just acting based on circumstances that they were forced into. So this stupid action movie managed to give us a more likable president than real life. Go figure. Overall, heads of state ruled. I have nothing bad to say about it. The only reason it's not higher is because, it's a dumb action movie and it doesn't try to be more than that. And I'm glad that it didn't. Number 36, The Naked Gun. I've spoken about this on this channel before, but I was not one of those kids who was just allowed to watch whatever they wanted growing up. I did not have a TV in my room, and so now, in my adult life, there's plenty of critical media that everybody has seen that I have not. So when they announced this movie and I heard people talking about it and they said it was actually good, I had some homework to do. So I sat down and I marathoned all 3 of the OG Naked Gun films. Now let's just say this, not every comedy from the late 20th century has aged very well. Can I be so bold? Can I make that brave point? But these films have aged very well. I found myself laughing out loud at them very often. Their reliance on running jokes and sight and prop gags and wordplay rather than like topical or overly crude humor means that somebody could watch these today for the first time and still really enjoy them. So in addition to the movie itself being fun, the homework I did to see it was fun too. It was in every way just a new Naked Gun movie with the same wordplay, the same focus on sight gags, a couple of non sequitur skits that wouldn't have felt out of place on Adult Swim. The puns and the wordplay seemed to be like the defining thing about the personality of Naked Gun, and there was a lot of that here. There's nothing I could say that hasn't already been said. They cast Liam Neeson in it because he's a serious action guy and he played the character straight. Same reason they cast Leslie Nielsen in the original movies. It's so perfect. Think about how similar their names are even. Leslie Nielsen, Liam Neeson. I mean, it's almost like this was written in the stars, like this was destined to happen. Overall, very funny movie. Pound for pound, probably the most laughs of any movie I saw this year, and as a comedy, I would say that makes it a success. 35, we've got The Surfer, a weird little Aussie Nicolas Cage movie that I saw at the food theater where I had dinner. Nick Cage does so many movies every year, it is impossible to see them. But this was the one that was on my radar. I saw a trailer for it that made it look weird and trippy, and so it piqued my interest and I went to see it. And it was in fact weird and trippy. You want to talk about an unreliable narrator. This is a movie where you start to wonder who the narrator even is. The whole thing about this movie is it starts to twist in on itself. It starts to muddle reality and your own perception and time. It is a fucking head trip of a film. It begins as this very basic story of a workaholic man trying to bond with his son over surfing. And it quickly descends into this psychedelic journey of tribalism, homelessness, otherism, and manosphere cultism. What really sold me with this movie is how much it uses repeated imagery and events and cyclical ideas to play with your sense of what's real and what's not. And the movie keeps flip-flopping you the whole time, to the point where the credits roll and you're still wondering how much of what you just saw was real. Now this may be surprising what I'm about to say to you, but keep in mind the man is a thespian. Nicolas Cage is really able to sell crazy and unhinged in this movie. I saw a couple of really fun Aussie films this year, and this one is definitely worth a watch. At number 34, we got K-Pop Demon Hunters. I feel like some of you are probably going to be upset that this one's not higher. Let me explain. This is the only movie on this list that the first person to hype it up to me was a child. I found out about it through one of my students, and she was flabbergasted that I had not seen it yet. So now that I have, is it worth all of the crazy hype it's been getting? I'm going to say yes, with an asterisk beside it. And that asterisk is, if you don't love K-pop as much as some people do, don't expect to love this movie as much as some people do. But there's still a lot to love here. First of all, the animation is gorgeous. It is stunning. Some of the best action choreography I saw this year came from this film. The character and creature designs are unique and appealing. And I really dug the mythology that they came up with, of the hunters being this trio of musicians who reincarnates in every age, and the strength of the Hanmoon, the mystical barrier that prevents demons from breaking into our world, is determined by their relationship with their fans. I really liked that. I thought that was such a lovely on-screen representation of how fundamentally human the communal act of making music and sharing it with people is. It connects and binds and strengthens all of us, and thematically, that made even more sense when you factor in that the demons in this movie are used to represent like your inner demons, the things that you're personally struggling with that you're not proud of. And all of that is great, and that's the meat and potatoes of the movie, but there were a couple of things about the climax that bothered me, and that's why this movie's not higher on the list, so obviously I have to spoil it to talk about those things. If you don't want that, skip ahead. So for a kid's movie that asked all these deeper questions, it definitely felt to me like there were certain things that they just left unresolved, hoping that the viewer wouldn't think too hard about them, but that doesn't make any sense because the movie's asking us to think. For example, what was all that talk about finding a better way forward and then just sealing the Hanmoon normally at the end of the movie? The existence of Jinoo would suggest that there are other demons who feel remorseful for their actions and want to redeem themselves. And Rumi herself, a half-demon, feels bad for the other demons for being stuck down there in eternal suffering. And because of how violent Zoe and Mira are singing these songs about how they're going to kill all the demons, they all deserve to die, to me, it starts to feel like a little bit of a racial thing, especially since Rumi herself is part demon. So what, Rumi had a complete 180 change of heart after everything? She just said, nah, fuck it. If there's anybody else like Jinoo down there, they're SOL. And again, some of you are probably saying, oh, you're thinking too hard about it, but the movie asks you to think about its subtext, so sue me. Whatever. I probably missed something and some super fan in the comments is going to let me know about it. It doesn't matter. Let's continue. Coming in at a strong number 33, The Thunderbolts, asterisk. Depending on who you ask, this is the best superhero movie that came out this year. I disagree, but it's got a lot of good things going for it. It is significant to mention that this is the biggest crossover film that the MCU has done since the last Avengers movie, which, as I already said, is the biggest spot where they're fumbling the bag right now, but I digress. But anyways, I was really surprised with this one. I was very skeptical at the casting of Lewis Pullman, but it really worked with the portrayal of Bob Reynolds that they were going for, as this like mousy, timid man who just got out of substance abuse issues. And like the concept of a bunch of B and C tier anti-heroes and small-time villains, just, it didn't sound that interesting to me. Especially when I found out they were going to go up against the goddamn Sentry. I was like, okay, how's that going to work? So, extremely unlike other superhero movies, rather than the final confrontation being this contest of might, it's more about mental trauma and loneliness and depression versus the concepts of family and love, and it's all done in this very cool, illustrative way. I mean, I don't have a ton to say about this one. It's a superhero movie that tackled some pretty serious subject matter in a very genuine way, and it had some great performances, especially Florence Pugh, who, as we all know, is really, really good at looking distraught. At number 32, we got The Roses, a couples comedy that I did actually take my lady to see. Now, most Americans are going to know Benedict Cumberbatch for one of two things, Sherlock or Doctor Strange, and in both of those roles he is essentially superhuman, so it was fun to see him play just like a normal guy. And Olivia Colman, who I suspect most of my fellow Americans will know from The Bears, ironically playing a very similar character here as a matronly chef, except this time there's kids involved. The Roses is a really honest movie, like the kind of movie where I feel like a lot of people are going to watch it and see situations that they've gone through or feelings that they've had, but didn't feel like they could verbalize out loud. Make no mistake, this is a very funny movie, albeit very dry, because, you know, Brits. But it also does a good job of balancing that with a lot of sincerity and sensitivity, because, again, this is a movie that is ultimately about how resentment brews and eventually destroys relationships from the inside out. Anyways, yeah, a very fun movie that probably would have made it higher if it wasn't for one crucial thing that, spoiler warning, I guess, the trailer. The goddamn trailer showed almost exclusively the last act of the film, where the couple are trying to destroy each other's careers with these escalating acts of defamation. This is supposed to be the big, nail-biting climax of the movie, but literally every single moment of that climax was shown in the trailers. Why? I don't know what's in the water right now with spoiling the entire movie in the trailers, but they have got to put a stop to this. Coming in at number 30, a slightly lesser known body horror film, The Ugly Stepsister. Compared to him, this one did a much better job of taking its premise to the logical extreme. You might guess that this is a retelling of the Cinderella story, but it's interesting because Cinderella is an asshole in this movie. She's also highborn compared to her stepsister, so that factors into their dynamic as well. And the basic plot revolves around Elvira, the titular ugly stepsister, trying to become more attractive, well, conventionally attractive, so that she can marry Prince Julian and bring money to her family. And of course, the stepmother, who is still very much the villain of this film and this story, pushes her to the extreme and gets her to do all of these experimental treatments that escalate in intensity and pain. Where this movie really thrives, rather than the crazy body horror visuals, which are a ton of fun, where this movie really thrives is in the psychology that would drive somebody to do all this stuff. Because the real horror here is unrealistic beauty standards. And in addition to this, we've also got this really interesting story of the tension between Elvira and Agnes, who is Cinderella in this one. Neither of them are really in the wrong, necessarily. They're just two women being pitted against each other by societal norms. And in between all the jealousy and the blackmail and everything, we do get these very tender moments between the two of them where there is this sort of mutual understanding of, I see you and I see what you're going through because I'm going through it too. So when it starts with the nose job and ends up with some of the most outlandishly disgusting things happening imaginable, it all feels very logical. It feels like, well, of course we got here because we're given a very logical window into Elvira's thought process, which is unfortunately the same thought process that women have been enduring for hundreds of years. This is part of a wave of new horror films that are focusing more on bringing women's perspectives on their lives into the fold via horror films, i.e. The Substance. Man, I love The Substance. You want to talk about a modern day classic, that's a modern day classic, but this video isn't about that. Number 30, The Phoenician Scheme. In my defense of ranking this movie where I did, I want to address the whole, Wes Anderson, he makes the same movie every time. I want to address that. To those people I say, so what? Creatives don't have some kind of obligation to drastically switch up what they're doing every time. Not to mention, if they did do that, there would be just as many people upset that they didn't do the same thing that put them on the map in the first place. So there's really no winning there. The dude found his niche, he leaned into it, he's got his audience. Who cares? And plus, even though we crave novelty, novelty doesn't inherently make something more valuable. I've talked about this on the channel before. I will say though, the whole international man of action archetype is probably Wes Anderson's favorite character. You had Mr. Fox, you had Monsieur Gustave, and now you have Zaza Corda. I mean, this is more of a heist movie than anything, which here just means a group of protagonists traveling around to collect a bunch of things to achieve a central goal. The star power in this movie is pretty incredible, and everybody seemed like they were having a lot of fun, or at the very least I had a lot of fun watching them. Bryan Cranston, Tom Hanks, Benicio del Toro, Michael Cera, Benedict Cumberbatch. I mentioned Jeffrey Wright and Scarlett Johansson, both of whom I've already mentioned on this list. An energetic story, plenty of twists, a really heartwarming ending. What more could you want? It's Wes Anderson, and if you like Wes Anderson, you're gonna like it, and that seems to be the consensus with this movie, and I'm okay with that. At number 29, we got Sisu Road to Revenge, another movie that I had to do some homework to watch. And I'm okay with that, because it's always fun when a crazy, dumb, over-the-top action movie ends up teaching me something like this one did. Or, well, rather, the first one, because I had no idea what the Lapland Wars even were. So if you didn't know, this is a sequel. This is Sisu 2. So I watched Sisu 1 the day before I went to see it, and man... It's a very simple story. It's about a Finnish ex-soldier named Tommy Korpi battling Nazis during the Lapland Wars during the last days of World War II for this life-changing amount of gold that he found himself. What makes this movie fun isn't the setting, it's more so the ridiculous levels that they pushed the logic to, to the extreme of the extreme. There's a part in this movie where he prevents himself from being hung by impaling his leg on a nail sticking out of the post that he's being hung off of so that he can take enough gravity off his neck to stay alive. There's a part where he slices a man's neck underwater and then breathes the oxygen through the slice wound to stay underwater for longer. So when you have to make a sequel that ups the ante from that, you know you're in for a crazy time. As strong as the first film was, I do think this one was better. The action was bigger and more creative and more non-stop, and my god, the ending was just so unbelievably sweet. I don't think I've ever found myself getting choked up at the end of an action movie before the way I did with this one. So if you don't go in expecting some deep philosophical war film about how horrible war is, you'll have a really good time. You will. Number 28, Black Bag. This is a movie that flew under the radar for a lot of people and is now popping up on a bunch of most underrated films of 2025 lists. And for good reason. Essentially what you've got here is sort of a spy thriller meets a mystery film, which are two genres that go together really well because they're all about plot points and details and investigation. And above all, characterization, which this movie absolutely nails. They put all their marbles into the characterization bag, and it actually paid off. I've called a lot of movies on this list dumb. This is a smart movie. One that treats its characters as complex beings, and one where the action comes almost entirely in the form of repartee, the tete-a-tete. It may interest you to know that David Koepp, the guy who wrote this movie, also wrote several of the Jurassic Park films, including the newest one, the Tom Cruise War of the Worlds, and Sam Raimi's Spider-Man. So this dude's already proven his chops with the big Hollywood blockbusters, but now he's also proven that he can write these sort of smaller, more contained character pieces. I don't have a lot to say about this one, but that's because there's really not a lot to complain about. It's just really good. Just watch it. Number 27, Luca Guadagnino's After the Hunt. I am certain some people are going to be upset at my placement of this on this list, but let me explain. I do understand why some people didn't like this film, but for me, it was, if you want to put a number on it, a pretty solid 8 out of 10. If you don't want spoilers, I'm just going to say this movie was nuanced and misunderstood in my opinion. If you don't want spoilers, stick around and I'm going to explain why I feel this movie was underappreciated. Going into this movie, based on all the trailers, I figured it was going to be the Andrew Garfield rapist movie, not the guy, his character in the movie, if that wasn't clear. And it is. That is what the film is. But it was less of the Andrew Garfield rapist movie and more like the... I gotta stop calling it that before the algorithm thinks I'm trying to make some kind of accusation. It was less the sexual assaulter movie and more the did the guy do the sexual assault movie. The main conflict of this movie is that Ayo Edebiri's character Maggie Resnick accuses college professor Hank Gibson of sexual assault. Now Hank is best friends with Julia Roberts' character Alma Ermhoff, and together they're both working towards tenure, so Alma gets caught in this kind of situation of, is she going to stick by this female student, or is she going to stick by her professional friend when they're so close to achieving their goals? And the initial argument that Hank makes is that he recognizes how sensitive of a subject this is, and how most people will believe the victim because of how many times the victim hasn't been believed, and because also since he is a straight white man, he must therefore be the villain. In both real life and this movie, we are immediately inclined to believe the victim because that is what you should do. But this movie also plays on the idea that false accusations do happen, albeit not very often, but they do. And the movie goes to great lengths to show you that Maggie is not the most honest person. She cheats a lot, she kind of coasts by on her rich parents and the donations they make to the school, and this causes a lot of friction with Alma, who had to really struggle and go through some shit to get to where she is. So now, in addition to this do I support my student or do I support my colleague thing, you also have this added layer of friction regarding privilege, which becomes even more complex because Maggie is black, right? This movie is layers on layers on layers of how different social issues interact and affect one another. Just when you think you've got your mind made up on one dilemma that the movie poses, it throws another one your way. One of the biggest criticisms this movie received was that there were a lot of people who felt like it was resentful of woke culture, and I gotta tell you, I just didn't get that from this movie. There are characters in the film who are homophobic or are dismissive of rape, and I think there were some people who interpreted that as the movie trying to condone those things or say they're okay, when really, to me, it was more like This is a reflection of the world as it is, as art often is. This is a reflection of people who actually exist, their actual viewpoints. This movie has been described as something of like a mirror that gets held up to the viewer, so I mean, if you're curious, I say watch it. Even if you absolutely hate it, I don't think you'll be bored. Number 26, Wake Up Dead Man, also known as Knives Out 3, even though no one calls it that. If you're not a big mystery person, you've probably seen enough episodes of Scooby-Doo or Sherlock Holmes to know how these kind of things usually play out. You got the setup for the whodunit, the intro, the ensemble cast, the assemblage of facts, the red herring, maybe an additional murder or two, and then at the end you've got the big reveal where everything comes together and all the pieces fall into place. This is how this genre works, and in a genre that classic and formulaic, you gotta find some ways to mix it up. That's what's fun about these movies. Rian Johnson has gotten really good at playing at audience expectations of the meta of how a mystery movie works. Throw Daniel Craig in there having a ball and you've got a hit every time. Because in murder mysteries, it's never who you think it is, but now in these modern ones, we've also got this added layer of like, it's never who you don't think it is. I don't know if I'm making any sense, but just watch it. It's Knives Out. It's fun. You don't even have to watch them in order. They're standalone movies. At number 25, we've got The Housemaid, and let me just give a little round of applause here. Man, Sydney Sweeney, she needed a win, and she finally got one. Now, full disclosure, I did not see Christie, and I only saw half of Eden because I watched it on the plane and I fell asleep because I was bored. Both of them kind of flopped, and both of them people didn't really like, so... Now, I'm not here to pass judgment on Sydney Sweeney, because as far as I'm concerned, that infamous interview is being overblown by everyone. All I'm here to say is this movie was extremely entertaining, far more than I thought it was going to be. And there's nothing I could say about why I liked this movie so much without kind of spoiling what it is, so just watch it for yourself and know that it's kind of a mystery, kind of a romance, and kind of a horror film all in one. And like, seriously, if you're thinking about watching this movie, just go on to the next entry, because this is one where if I spoil it, it will hurt your enjoyment of it. Okay, is everybody gone? Okay, here's the spoilers. So you remember when I said that gaslighting is the root of a lot of modern horror? Well, this movie may as well be a remake of the classic Gaslight film. There's so much gaslighting in this movie. Sydney Sweeney is Millie Calloway, an extremely poor ex-convict who, as part of her parole deal, has to land a job, and she gets one as a live-in maid for this very rich family. The members of the family are Nina and Andrew and their little daughter. First half of this movie is Nina gaslighting the fuck out of Millie, and initially you as the viewer are led to believe that it's like a jealousy thing, which makes it ironic when that pushes Millie and Andrew together and they fuck and kick Nina out of the house. Now, if you're like me and you've got a solid sense of runtime, like you know how long you've been watching the movie for, you get to this point that seems like the end and you know that you're only halfway through the film, so you're waiting for the other shoe to drop. But it was how the shoe dropped that got me. I thought Nina was going to come back, go on a psycho rampage, have a big final showdown with Millie, that kind of thing. I didn't expect that the actual twist was that Andrew is actually this like OCD serial rapist sociopath scumbag who manipulated everybody around him with his good looks and his charm into thinking that Nina was crazy. And all of a sudden we get this insane story flip. We get the whole story from Nina's perspective. It recontextualizes the whole movie up to that point. It flips the script totally on its head. I love shit like that. I love being taken for a ride whenever I'm watching a movie. But all of a sudden, this movie stops being like Psycho Housewife and starts being a much more relatable, grounded story about abuse. Domestic, physical, mental, sexual, all of it. And solidarity with the victims of that abuse. It's pretty funny. The whole reason that Nina hired Millie was because she thought, oh, this is a girl who got put in jail for murdering a rapist. She could help me out. There's even like an Avengers Initiative style thing at the end of the film where it sets Millie up to go get hired by more abused housewives and I suppose kill their husbands as well. Which I gotta say, I did think that cliffhanger was a little outlandish for a movie that up to this point had been pretty grounded, but whatever. The book that the movie is based on had that same ending as well, so, you know, who cares? And even though this film was directed by a man, the book it was based on was written by a woman, so I am going to count this movie as part of my modern horror directed by women about the issues that women specifically face. All in all, really, really, really good time that I had with this one. Don't know if I'd like it as much the second time, though, it being such a big twist and all. It's 24, the Philippou twins' second horror film, Bring Her Back. Now see, these guys hit the ground running a couple of years ago with Talk to Me, another 3-syllable horror film that many at the time billed as the TikTok horror film. But it used the social media in a way that felt organic and didn't sacrifice the scares or the emotional poignancy. So the question must be asked, did they do it again? Well, to me, this movie was better than Talk to Me by like a decent margin. But it's a very different movie. See, this one is less about using ghosts as a metaphor for recreational substance abuse, and more about how loss and grief and despair can make people desperate and transform even the kindest souls into absolute freak monsters, who then make that despair the problems of the children in their care. From the moment Andy and Piper enter the home of their new foster mother and she blocks him out in that picture, I knew that we were in for some nonsense. Absolutely diabolical shot, up there with the photo reveal in The Strange Thing About the Johnsons, which, if you haven't watched that movie, do yourself a favor and don't, please. And I know this is a popular take, but the stakes always feel more real when children are involved. And yeah, the demon-possessed child with a distended belly is creepy, as are the hostage video-style instructional tapes on how to bring her back and perform the ritual correctly. But you know what's real horror? That's right, gaslighting. The gaslighting in this film is out of control. Piper is blind, right? So the stepmother uses that to her advantage and tries to pit Piper and Andy against each other in this attempt to separate them, the better to use them towards her own insidious motives. There ought to be more gaslighting per capita in this film than any other film I've seen this year. That is a big statement, but I'm standing by it. It is the rare film that manages to make both the real and supernatural aspects of it viscerally scary. Really, really good movie. And speaking of The Strange Thing About the Johnsons, at number 23 we have Eddington. There's not a whole lot that I could say about Ari Aster that has not already been said. That dude has been making his problems the problems of the average moviegoer for far too long, and he needs to be stopped. His latest movie came as kind of a surprise to many of us. We were like, what? No scary naked people in the bushes? No ritualistic beheading? No blood eagle? No weird drugged rape impregnation? No giant talking penis monster? No incestuous sexual abuse? What are you doing, Ari? Did you lose your edge? The answer is no. No, he didn't. As is the trend with modern horror, he managed to find the horror in the everyday insanity and chaos that plagues our world. And it's just seemed to be getting worse and worse since 2020, which is the time period that this movie is about. It's about a small town that is besieged with COVID and masks and quarantine and racial tension and all these other things that consumed us in the year 2020 and have just kind of seemed to be getting worse and worse since then. The movie is helmed by Joaquin Phoenix, which, like, I'm a movie pleb. I usually can't tell when people can act or not. Okay, that dude can act in everything I see him in. I'm saying that with full confidence. That's how well he can act. I'm not going to spoil anything with this one. Not that it would matter if I did, because if I tried to recount the events of this movie, it would sound like I was trying to recall dreams from when I had COVID. It's just that long and strange, and it goes to all these places that you wouldn't think it would go. But what makes it really fun is this through line of very logical cause and effect coherence. The idea that all these things are related, that craziness begets further craziness, and then when you take a step back and look at all of it, it kind of looks like, well, an Ari Aster movie. Number 22, another animated movie, Flow. Who would have thought that a movie about a cute little cat and his capybara buddy would have been so enthralling? Yes, this movie came out in 2024, but it only had a limited release very late into the year, and some places like Belgium didn't get it until 2025, so screw it, I'm gonna count this one. In this movie of very sparse storytelling, the world is drowned by this flood of biblical proportions, and a cat goes on an adventure in a boat with an ensemble of animals that is initially just a capybara, but eventually comes to include a lemur, a secretary bird, and a golden retriever. And that's the story, these 5 animals going on this kind of Life of Pi-esque journey together. The lack of dialogue seems like a gimmick at first, but it's actually essential to how the film conveys its characters. These are animals. It would be too cheap to have them talk like human beings, so instead, they are allowed to communicate their emotions like animals. Like, for example, capybaras are easygoing and very friendly in real life. They are known to make friends with lots of different kinds of animals. So the capybara in this movie is very sagely and is the one that initially encourages the animals to help each other out. The lemur is like a neurotic hoarder. The secretary bird becomes sort of an older sibling to the rest of the group, and the golden retriever doesn't know what's going on. He's just along for the ride. And this dynamic between these 5 animals is more than enough to be fun and interesting for 90 minutes. Not only is the artwork beautiful, but it inspires so many questions while you're watching it, like, who built these giant statues? What existed in this world before animals became the dominant force? Why is this whale this like mystical creature of the deep rather than the whale that we know? The more you watch, the more questions you have, and they don't get answered, which may bother some people, but I thought it was pretty cool. There are no Easter eggs to find, there's no deeper lore to interpret, it is just a very simple story that you are presented the facts of, and then it ends. It's streamlined, it's meditative, it's a good watch. Number 21, Superman. Let's talk about a movie that most people actually probably saw. Now, I'm sure you don't need me to tell you this, but ironically for Big Blue, this was actually one of the most contentious films of the year. There were a lot of people rooting on this film's downfall, from Snyder fans who were mad that James Gunn was helming the new DCU, to people who were upset about the movie's apparent pro-immigrant messaging. Which, yeah, newsflash, Superman is an immigrant, always has been. And also, I'm not here to talk about Snyder, because whichever way you could say you like his movies, you don't like his movies, he'll get crucified either way. But in spite of all these people rooting against this movie, much like the man himself, this movie cleaned up, at least, by the standards of superhero movies in the past couple years. And in my opinion, for good reason. I didn't love this movie as much as some people did, but I still really enjoyed it. I thought skipping the origin story and throwing us straight into the action was a very solid choice. A lot of superhero movies are doing that now. The approach is becoming increasingly common because we are rapidly living in like a post-origin story world. Like, people are sick of origin stories because we saw nothing but origin stories for like 15 years. And besides, most people know the details of all the famous origin stories anyways. Do you want to see the pearls in the alleyway again? You want to see Uncle Ben bleeding out on the sidewalk? You want to see Krypton explode? No, you don't. Of course, I gotta give props to the Justice Gang. Shout out to my guy Nathan Fillion for crushing Guy Gardner. Shout out to Eddie Gattegi, which in and of itself is a comic book ass name, for getting redemption on how dirty Bryan Singer did him back in the day. And of course, David Corn Sweat himself. But to me, the big standout was Nicholas Hoult, because who doesn't love to see a world-class hater in action? Granted, to bring up the Bryan Singer X-Men movies again, Nicholas Hoult to me growing up was Hank McCoy, aka the Beast. So I have a tough time seeing him as a villain now, even though The Menu went a long ways towards helping me with that. But he was probably the best part of an already really good film. I mean, you could feel the hatred emanating from this dude. More than that, I really liked the wacky, zany comic book world that the movie took place in. I know that grounded superhero movies were the thing for a while, but I'm glad to bring a little bit more of the fantasy back into it, Number 20, Frankenstein. God bless and protect Guillermo del Toro, man. In a time when the role of the artist is constantly being thrown into question by a society that devalues them, this dude has used his platform to adamantly and repeatedly speak about the importance of human art. And he hasn't just talked too, no, he has really put his money where his mouth is, especially with this movie. There's so much to love here. I mean, let's start with the actors. Jacob Elordi, Mia Goth, Oscar Isaac, all great actors, all already having proven their chops in movies I enjoyed, all acting their asses off here. We get a more book-accurate Frankenstein's monster. He's got the amplified physical attributes. He's eloquent and articulate and gentle, until he's not, and he's filled with rage at his creator. The thing that I really found interesting about this movie was that the story, the small alterations they did make, leaned way, way more in the direction of Dr. Frankenstein being the villain. Because if you've read the original book, you know that the monster does some pretty irredeemable things. No, Dr. Frankenstein's not a good guy, but he didn't necessarily know the magnitude of what he had taken part in, whereas Frankenstein in this movie is a bastard. He is evil. You can't wait to see him get his. And watching Oscar Isaac gradually become more and more unhinged is very fun. It's like Moon Knight on crack. But what really won me over with this movie, and I think this is probably the case with a lot of people, was how incredible it looked. Every costume, every practical effect, every set, every prop, everything was unbelievably gorgeous. And if you watch the BTS stuff, you'll see that most of the stuff in this movie was practical and that Del Toro insisted on it. You can really just feel every ounce of love that was put into everything that you're seeing on screen. It was a great creature feature, it was a great dramatic piece, it's probably the best adaptation of the story we've gotten on screen, and just in time for The Bride to drop in a couple months as a nice complimentary piece. Robert Eggers, when you inevitably try your hand at this one, I wish you luck. Number 19, The Fantastic Four: The First Steps. I went and saw this movie in 3D on my birthday. That's my review. In all seriousness, the Fantastic Four, they've had a very special place in my heart for quite some time. It's two things that make the Fantastic Four as beloved as they are: wacky, high-concept sci-fi nonsense, and the family dynamic. This movie, next to Age of Ultron, might have the best introductory sequence of any superhero movie I've ever seen. It just opens up with the team fighting monsters and their villains straight out of the splash panels from the 60s. The retro-futurist aesthetic of the version of Earth that this movie takes place in is just delightful. And the soundtrack perfectly blends that aesthetic with the typical superhero trappings that we're kind of used to by now. It's just, more so than any other movie that Marvel's put out recently, this one was just so much fun to look at. Everything in it. My God, that's without even getting into Galactus and the detail they put into his armor and his ship and the Silver Surfer Shala Ball and the special effects that they used for her, especially in all of these different situations she's in, outer space, the black hole. It's just terrific. But aside from the action, the sci-fi conceits, the cosmic horror, which it was very welcome to see that done with Galactus in a film finally, what really tied this movie together was how strongly it actually managed to resonate with the concept of family, and how some people would move mountains, or mountain-sized beings, to protect theirs. Coming in at number 18, Together. This is the other movie that I saw on my birthday. It is purely coincidental that the two lined up together like this. Now let me just get this out of the way. I have not seen Better Half yet, nor am I here to weigh in on the drama surrounding whether or not this movie ripped off of that one. I'm just here to talk about what I thought about this movie. There's a lot to chew on here. This movie merged two horror genres that are usually handled independently: the supernatural and body horror. Now, Together doesn't just blend these two types of horror together, it also then superimposes that blend onto what is essentially a relationship drama about two codependent people who are beginning to resent each other. And like I've said already, so many of these modern horror movies derive their scares from something real, something relatable, and then they just dress it up as something make-believe. Like for Hereditary, it was passing down family trauma without even trying, a la Annie Sleepwalking. For Smile, it was how trauma you don't deal with will literally eat you alive. For It Follows, it was about STDs. Bring Her Back, abusive households. Good Boy, hereditary illness. And now, this movie, codependent relationships. In the very first trailer I saw for this movie, I knew it was going to be something special. Again, when you see a movie like this, you want to see it take things to the logical extreme. And this is a movie about a couple who, they're out hiking one day trying to reclaim their passion for each other, and they both drink from this well that mysteriously makes things eventually merge together. Physically merge together. It's such a simple idea, but it's really harrowing and effective and leads to a lot of gross and scary and what the hell and really funny moments throughout the film. And that's how you do it. You take a simple idea like that and you say, how many crazy directions can I spin this off into? The way that this extremely creative conceit is used gives each and every scene some new, awful way that it's going to stick in your brain. Fun fact, this is one of very few horror films I've seen in the past few years that actually creeped me out enough to keep me up at night a couple of times, so give my flowers for Together. It's just really good. The acting, the jokes, the special effects, the concept, and the execution. The only thing I can get it on is, I hate to say it once again, the trailer. Absolutely nothing in this movie was a surprise to me. I was able to guess every single beat of the film, save for one singular surprise that I didn't see coming. You know, honestly, at this point, I might just make a completely separate video about trailers and how much of a problem they are and how frequently they ruin movies for people. I was so jazzed about Project Hail Mary. That is, until they spoiled the entire film in the trailer. And it was even worse because I couldn't turn it off because the name of the movie wasn't until the end of the trailer. So if I wanted to know what movie it was, I had to sit through the spoilers. Can you tell I'm upset about this? Number 17, Novocaine. I wish that there was more space on this list so I could put this one higher. In a world saturated with typical action flicks, directors must come up with ways to make action films more original and creative. And that's exactly what they did. Dan Burke and Robert Olson created one of the most fun and original takes on the classic rescue the girlfriend formula that you will ever see in your life. The basic premise is that our guy, Nathan Kane, played by Jack Quaid, is this kind of everyman who sees himself as very socially awkward and plain. He can't feel pain, so that's part of it. So he asks one of his coworkers out, they start dating, it goes well, they hook up, everything's cool. But of course, in an action film, bliss must never go undisturbed. There's an armed robbery at the bank he works at. The boss is killed, the girlfriend is kidnapped, and this dude, on foot, unarmed, sets off to deal with the problem himself. They waste no time after this inciting event. This dude, Nathan Kane, does all kinds of crazy shit. He jacks a cop car to follow these criminals and proceeds to engage them hand to hand all throughout the shopping district. And it is during this initial sequence when he realizes that his inability to feel pain could actually work to his advantage. And what follows from there is one of the weirdest, grossest, funniest, most creative action movies, not just this year, but like maybe ever. Know this about me. I love when a movie is take a very simple concept and stretch it into all the crazy, most far out things you could possibly do with it. And man, did they go whole hog with this movie. But it's just because he can't feel pain doesn't mean he's not getting injured, right? So the whole movie is just this series of escalating craziness and higher stakes. And like, in addition to this movie being funny and the action being good, because of the nature of his ability, it is also like a body horror film. So if you're not a body horror person, this one might make you a little squeamish at certain parts, I won't lie. Just to sell you on this movie, if you're not already sold, I'm going to give you a little spoiler. I'm going to describe one action scene to you. Skip ahead to the next entry if you don't want to hear it. He digs his hands, he smashes glass on the ground, and he digs his wounded hands into it and gives himself glass knuckles to fight this big man that's way bigger than him. Again, this movie does veer very strongly into body horror territory, so if that's not for you, maybe stay away. But otherwise, man, this is one of the most fun movies you could watch this year. Number 16, Mickey 17. That's crazy. This movie was almost number 17. I swear I didn't plan that. You want to know why this movie didn't review better than it did? I'll tell you why. It's because it was directed by Bong Joon-ho, the guy who directed, depending on who you ask, the current film of the century, Parasite. So expectations for this movie were sky high. And there's so many great actors in this movie too. Mark Ruffalo, who was really fun against type in Poor Things. Toni Collette, who I've already talked about on this list and really needs no introduction anyway. Naomi Ackie playing this beautiful balance of unhinged and loving and caring. And of course, Rob Pat, who also played more than one character this year, technically. The premise of this one, if you didn't see it, is that Mickey volunteered to be an expendable, which is a person on this expedition voyage that is commissioned to do very dangerous tasks that often result in their deaths. And every time he dies, a clone of him with his brain template is printed. So the numbers represent which iteration of Mickey it is. And as you might expect, this experience of living and dying makes Mickey a very sheepish dude who views his own life with this sense of detached indifference. And the only thing that really keeps him grounded is his girlfriend, Nasha. So the first thing this movie is fundamentally about is that a relationship goes through phases, because we find out that each Mickey that gets printed off is actually like a little bit different. So there's two inciting incidents in this movie. One, Mickey 17 is rescued from certain death by creepers who everybody thought were hostile but are actually very friendly. And two, Mickey 17 meets Mickey 18, who is very hostile and aggressive, and there cannot be two clones of anyone in the expendable program, otherwise they both get terminated. So now these two are forced to work together to ensure their own survival. Like you might expect of a movie from this director, the film deals heavily with a lot of social issues, in particular imperialism, colonization, racism, that kind of thing. This movie is not subtle, not at all. I mean, Mark Ruffalo is even basically doing his best impression of Donald Trump. But like I said, sometimes subtlety is overrated. The visuals and the scoring are great, and the design they came up with the creepers is both terrifying and cute. It's really impressive how they managed to achieve that balance, because once the story perspective flips and you see the creepers for what they really are, the movie works both ways. It's awesome. But man, great movie, great story, great concept, great acting, especially from Rob Pat, and an ending that would bring a tear to the eye of even the most hardened man. Can I just take a moment? This is not even the first movie with Rob Pat on this list. Can I just take a second to appreciate and just say how glad I am that that man managed to break out of those movies he hated and land roles playing all kinds of characters. Number 15, Predator Badlands. You knew this movie was going to be pretty high up for me. This was a truly epic movie, and I've already done like a big breakdown of this one that's posted to the channel, so if you want to hear more about it, you can just watch that video. But, I really liked it. It's on the list at this point. The good thing is that most of the movies I was really excited to watch in 2025 did actually live up to the hype, and in some cases ended up being even better, like Badlands. Number 14, The Life of Chuck. This was a great year for Stephen King adaptations, and even the worst of them was still an enjoyable experience. But here's a movie that is very different. This movie is both literally and figuratively kind of three separate stories together, which is fitting because the book that it's based on is also a collection of short stories. The movie gets told in reverse chronological order, like it starts at the final point in the story and goes backwards. And with sort of repeated phrases and images and iconography, you gradually become aware of the true nature of what you're seeing. But it is, shell-shocking, the first 40-50 minutes of this movie. I don't want to get into specifics because the hard pivots of genre in this movie are a big part of the beauty of it. So I'm just going to give my spoiler warning now and say for the people who haven't seen it who want to, really, really good. It's difficult to explain what's so kind of moving about this movie, but the closest description I can come up with is that there's a real sense of grandiosity and scale and dread and impossibility and hopelessness in the first act. And then later on, when the titular guy of the movie finally actually shows up, it's such an expression of joy and magic and community and happiness that it's like this complete tonal 180. And it's not the only movie on this list with this theme, but this movie also deals heavily in the idea of how even though we know everything is going to end, it's not futile. There's still a lot of point to living, and there's still a lot of ways that you can do good and be good for the people around you. And that's a nice message. Number 13, Boxcutter, which is undoubtedly the most obscure movie I have on this list. It has to be. First, let me get the technicality out of the way. This is another one of those that screened at a film festival in 2024, but it didn't get a release until 2025. I'd actually be surprised if any of you watching this video have seen this movie, and if you Google it, you'll find that you're unable to find images of most of the actors, a plot synopsis. You'll find articles and interviews and stuff. Like, it's not like this movie's like a fever dream or a scam, but it's just not very well known, and I think that's a shame. Some people will tell you they loved it, some people will tell you it was mid. I'm here to tell you it was one of the most effective works of subversion I've watched, not even just this year, but ever. Now, because of how obscure this movie is, I want to go into a little bit deeper of an analysis with this one, because I feel like this is the only Boxcutter analysis a lot of you are ever going to see. And I feel like this movie was so beautifully constructed in its subversion and the way that it handled the meta of a movie like this, that it's a damn tragedy that this is going to be the only analysis you see of it. Now, this is without getting into how fascinating I find the Toronto dialect and the blending of cultures up there and all that kind of stuff. I'm purely going to talk about this movie on the film level, and this is another one where I can't get into what's cool about it without spoiling it, so that's it. You've been warned. Okay, so for my crowd that doesn't care about spoilers, this movie follows the aspiring producer slash rapper Rome. He lives together with his friend and manager Sid in an apartment that they can barely pay for on Rome's warehouse salary, and that's where the name of the film comes from. That's what he does at the warehouse. He opens boxes, hence Boxcutter. After multiple unsuccessful attempts to break into the music scene, there's people who want to pay him an exposure, people who want him to pay them to allow him to perform. Rome bribes one of his co-workers into getting him into a party with Richie Hill, who's a really famous producer who Rome believes could make him famous if he's able to impress the dude enough. Now, Rome and Sid have been having issues with their shady landlord, and when Rome comes back to the apartment, he finds two burglars stealing his shit, and they jump him and knock him out, and when he wakes up, his laptop is gone, and that's what's got all his music on it. So now, he's got this race against time going on to track down all 4 producers who contributed beats to his album so that he can take those beats, make it to the party, and perform his stuff live for Richie Hill. So they set this movie up like the classic feel-good underdog story where he manages to pull it all out at the last second, right? He collects his stuff, everybody wishes him well, he rocks the mic, he gets everything, we have a time skip 10 years into the future, and he's rich and famous. Except a little less than halfway through the movie, you start to realize that Rome is a loser. He's a chump. His whole thing is that he wants people to hire him and pay him to perform, but nobody's going to pay somebody to perform that they've never heard of, that nobody's ever heard of. Yet this dude is stubborn and he refuses to use many of the free promotional tools that are available to us via social media. Instagram, TikTok, streaming music services, it doesn't matter. He won't put his stuff anywhere because he's terrified of people judging it. And the whole movie, both of his friends, Sid and his artist friend Janaya, who kind of serves as a foil to him, are trying to give him workable advice on how to move forward, and he just refuses to listen to either of them. With each additional producer we meet, Rome's prospects of impressing Richie Hill look bleaker and bleaker. One of the producers asks Rome to help him get ready for a show that night by helping him out with sound check, so he tells him to get on the stage and rock the mic. The only 3 people present in that room are the producer, Rome, and his friend Janaya. So he gets on the mic and he cannot do it. Even with just 2 other people present, he cannot spit anything, he can't get hype, he can't do anything on that mic because he has no experience performing. Another producer just straight up flames him in front of what they term real clients, saying that they let him play around in the studio before she brings in the actual real paying customers. And it's humiliating, it's very hard to watch. He gets shamed in front of other rappers who are physically larger than him, maybe conventionally more attractive, clearly have more money. And you as a viewer, this is where you're conditioned to say, oh, I know what's happening. This is the 11th hour. This is where he's gonna channel the spirit of Slim Shady and just rock the mic, rock the party, shake Richie Hill's hand, and get the good ending. Let me tell you what happens instead. Rome discovers that Sid orchestrated the robbery to steal the laptop in order to sell it and pay for rent. So they get into a fight, and now he loses his best friend. The bouncers don't even let Rome in the club with Richie Hill, and as he attempts to get in, they break his laptop in the process. And it is at this point that both the viewer and Rome simultaneously realize he does not have what it takes to pull this off. And so this point that in any other movie would be the moment of triumph is instead our main character crying and having a breakdown in an alleyway by himself. There's other things I could go into with this movie, like how Janaya is a foil to Rome because she's a headstrong artist who doesn't care what other people think, and that's why she's successful. Not to mention, she uses the tools available to her. She actually puts her stuff out there. But the beauty of this movie is twofold to me. Firstly, it is a very real portrayal of a career as an artist being full of roadblocks and rejections and disappointments and failures. And secondly, it's another one of those movies that plays on the audience's knowledge of the meta of how a movie like this should work out and then just wipes its ass with that. Sometimes in life you try your hardest and it's just not enough. And you cry, you mourn, you get up the next day, you dust yourself off, and you try again. And that's real. Number 12, Predator Killer of Killers. What a great time. I'm not going to give you a big analysis on this one because there's nothing to analyze. It's just cool. Dan Trachtenberg, who again I've already said a lot about, has basically figured out that the formula to making winning Predator movies is to just put them in different cool situations throughout history. It's the kind of action figure, cool factor driven joyride that you play out with your toys after school. Like, hey, what if a Predator fought ninjas and samurai? What if there was a big Predator and a big Viking lady with 2 shields? What if he flew a spaceship and fought fighter jets in the war? What if there was a ninja Predator and he was dressed the coolest of any Predator ever? Now, granted, I typically dislike when anthology format stories feel the need to tie all the stories together at the end. I'm looking at you, What If. The way they did it here, which I won't spoil, was actually very cool. This is another one of those that's done in like the Spider-Verse style, which is becoming increasingly popular, right? And for good reason, it's really cool looking. It is gorgeous in this movie and doesn't sacrifice any of the action. If anything, it just makes it better. If you're a Predator fan, if you're an action fan, if you're an animation fan, this is a movie for you. There's nothing deeper to analyze, no heady themes to talk about. This movie is this high on this list because it is that cool. So here's the thing, we're getting down to the top 10, and I know that that's kind of the big deal for a lot of people's rankings lists. In fact, many people will post exclusively their top 10, but I had a hard time deciding. So for my sake, we're going to just say that number 10 and 11 are kind of tied in no particular order. Okay? So tied for number 10, first off, we got Bugonia, the new Yorgos Lanthimos movie, again starring Emma Stone. I already mentioned the last one, Poor Things. So I was hyped for this movie months before the trailers hit the mainstream. Very much in the weirdo cinema tradition, this movie is about 2 preppers who kidnap a CEO to determine whether or not she is an alien. I mean, from the first trailer I saw, that premise alone, I was immediately sold. I said, I have to see this movie. The premise is both wacky and feels extremely, frighteningly feasible, like it could happen. The real stars of the show here are Jesse Plemons and Emma Stone, who are also joined by Aidan Delbus. This is another one of those tete-a-tete movies where most of the action is in dialogue because most of the film takes place between 3 people in 2 rooms in 1 house. Now obviously the big question of this movie is she an alien, yes or no? And that's such a black and white question that the way that the truth of the matter is played with and how the gray areas start to appear and open up is a big part of the film. And this is a deliberate decision, right? This is meant to parallel how a very simple truth can become increasingly distorted the further and further down these conspiracy rabbit holes we go. And especially the boogeymen that we are either told exist or that we create ourselves to distract from the very real problems that we might even have a hand in. There's a couple other movies on this list that deal with similar topics like Eddington or Mickey 17. Whereas those movies were big and grand and sweeping, this one took those conversations and distilled them into something that was pretty small and intimate. And what I really appreciated about how this movie presented the conversation is that it went out of its way to show that Jesse Plemons' character Teddy isn't some weirdo or outcast. He's friendly with his coworkers, he is well liked and known in the town. But he and his family were screwed by Big Pharma, and now he wants to do something about it and has gotten it into his head that there's something more going on. So this guy is in many ways relatable. I mean, he's a working class schlub. He's had an experience that all of us in some way can probably relate to. And that's the main thing that really manages to ground the madness of this movie, because you can see how somebody would be driven to this point where they think these things. And the point at which you would think kidnapping someone is a good idea. One thing that really stuck out to me while watching this one was the soundtrack. It really made it seem like you were watching this Greek tragedy unfold before you. And can I just say, I feel so bad for Jesse Plemons. I mean, Todd really screwed up that dude's image. He's going to be playing weirdos for the rest of his life. He's going to be playing Todds and Teddies forever. And speaking of weirdos, the other one tied for number 10, Dangerous Animals. Did y'all see this one, any of you? I'm not gonna hold you. I might have this one too high on my list, but I really don't care. I adored this movie. And now you're gonna listen to me talk about why I felt like a movie where a man chums and feeds his passengers to sharks was the 10th best movie I saw this year. It's worth mentioning that the trailer for this one had the opposite effect on me that most trailers do. I saw it and thought to myself, that looks awful. There's no way I'm going anywhere near that. It's also worth mentioning that because it was a limited release, I had to see it at 10:45 at night in a theater with no AC. If I had to describe this one in a nutshell, think Silence of the Lambs on a boat meets Jaws, but the shark isn't evil. Speaking of that, I want to get that out of the way because this movie was unfairly maligned by a bunch of people who didn't even see it, going, "Oh, it's another movie vilifying sharks." Now, to be fair, that's a valid concern. Sharks were unfairly vilified by Hollywood for many years, but if you would watch this movie, you would know that that's not what this movie was doing at all. In fact, a lot of this movie is about how cool and majestic sharks are. The villain, Tucker, played by Jai Courtney, has this reverent, almost worshipful fixation with them, which is of course what feeds his psychopathic compulsion to take these transient couples out to swim with the sharks, and then afterwards chum the men and feed the women to them while filming the entire thing. This movie follows the transient Zephyr and her harrowing experience above Tucker's boat after being kidnapped, depicting her efforts to escape and survive while also trying to save her fellow captive Ella. With a movie like this, the quality of the villain is the thing that does most of the heavy lifting, and Tucker is an unbelievably fun villain. The way he philosophizes, the way he believes people should be more like sharks, the little Animal Planet factoids he gives you right before he feeds you to the sharks in the chummed waters. He's just terrifying, and probably the scariest and funnest villain of any movie I saw this year. And also of every film I saw this year, they really kept the suspense rolling on this one. Like right up until the credits. Like literally until the credits roll, you're not sure who's gonna live and who's gonna die. Now, is there any deeper social commentary aside from don't be alone at night as a woman and watch your back? No, even though those are important messages to put out there. Now, this movie is this high on my list because it's a really great time. The acting is great, the villain is great, the concept is great, and it was refreshing to see a movie featuring sharks where the shark isn't like a villain. It's just a cool animal that you need to admire from a distance, like any beautiful animal. So yeah, saw some strong Aussie films this year. Coming in at number 9, we got Train Dreams. Now, full disclosure, this film was originally number 32 on my list. I thought to myself when I first saw it, because I saw it at the recommendation of a bunch of other people who had it in like their top 10. And I watched it and I was kind of like, well, that's it. I mean, that was nice. But so a couple days ago, I decided to give it another watch, thinking I must have missed the point of it. I must have not paid attention. I must not have just seen how everything was supposed to come together. I didn't expect myself to have some kind of big, dramatic epiphany about what the movie was really about. But, well, believe it or not, I actually did. And now it's at number 9. So let's talk about it. Now, this movie tricked me a little bit. By this point in the list, you probably know that, again, I struggle with slow-paced films. But this movie's not actually slow-paced. In fact, a lot of shit happens in this movie, and it moves very quickly. Things are always changing in this film. It's just everything in the movie is presented so gently and quietly and understated that it seems like a slow movie, even though it's not. This movie is about the logger Robert Grenier, played by Joel Edgerton. He's a frontiersman in the late 19th century, and he's trying to strike a better work-life balance. He travels a lot for work, which means he's not home very often, and this causes him a lot of distress because his wife and daughter are the things that give his life purpose for the first time ever. But this film is also a little bit of a ghost story, as throughout like the first half of it, Robert is haunted by the image, the phantom, of this Chinese man who he was working with, who was thrown off a bridge and murdered for, get this, being Chinese. Robert had nothing to do with it. He even tried to stop it, but the guilt of it still weighed heavily on his conscience. And whether or not there's actually a ghost following him around is ultimately unimportant. What matters in this story is that Robert feels guilty and probably even a little bit culpable for what happened. So every time the ghost appears, somebody gets hurt or dies. One thing that this movie continuously hammers you with is what is the point of it all? Initially, I thought this movie was another one about grief and loneliness and depression and grappling with loss And while the movie is about those things, it is more broadly about purpose. Not even just Robert's purpose, but just the purpose of all of it. And a lot of the characters in the film talk a lot about the oneness of it all. How everything in this world affects everything else. And how in that way, even the most seemingly insignificant of things become significant because they're part of this tapestry. And that's sort of the big epiphany that not only Robert, but also you, the viewer, are supposed to have, is that it's all linked. It's all this big cycle. Everything affects everything else. And there's something comforting about that. Encountering that point of the oneness of everything, the circle of life, is also the idea of death and decay, right? Entropy. The idea that everything deteriorates, everything ends. This is a bleak goddamn movie. And that is counterbalanced by the points about hope and the oneness of everything. But this is a very, very, very heart-rending, sad movie. Legitimately, I had, the second time I watched it, a full-on Always Sunny Danny DeVito epiphany about this film. And now it's one of my favorites that I saw last year. Also, shout out to Cree actor Nathaniel Arcand for playing not one, but two Native American men who appear to distressed white folks and try to set them on the right path. Moving on up, we got Caught Stealing at number 8, the new Darren Aronofsky. Every now and again you'll see a trailer for a movie and you'll think to yourself, that movie's for me. This movie was for me. Two really interesting things about this movie. One, it is a period piece depicting a period in time that I actually lived through, which was the late 90s. Now, that's pretty rare for period pieces to be about such modern periods in time. Of course, the example everybody points towards is the 2007 episode of BoJack Horseman, which was the first time I ever felt like that watching something. And two, I mentioned his name already, it was directed by Darren Aronofsky, who most people will know for Requiem for a Dream. Don't worry, this movie's nothing like that. This is a very upbeat movie, often lighthearted and even more often funny. Now, I will say this movie was also a box office bomb. It lost like between 40 and 90 million. And that really grinds my gears because I hate to see great movies like this lose money. And you know, and I'm gonna get on my soapbox here for a second, so forgive me. That really floors me considering the amount of people I see constantly complaining about how Hollywood is nothing but an endless parade of reboots and remakes and sequels and prequels. It's like, you know why that is? Because y'all don't go see original movies. Y'all, and I'm talking to the complainers right now, which honestly, that's probably not even the type of person who's watching this video. Y'all don't actually care about original stories, because if you did, you would go see them. And I know this because anybody who goes out of their way to check forums and websites and local theater listings to find movies that interest them know that the idea that there's nothing interesting out is horseradish, complete balderdash. Saying that to me is low-key disrespectful to the people who put their heart and soul and blood and sweat and tears into making new art. Coming down off the soapbox now. Let's continue with the movie. It is a very story-driven film. It is lean, it is no fat, the information is presented to you very quickly and efficiently. The main premise of this one is that Austin Butler's character, Hank Thompson, while apartment sitting for his punk rocker friend Russ, becomes embroiled in this three-way gang war between the Russians, the Puerto Ricans, and the Hasidic Jews, and all of whom are trying to pit him against the others. So the whole thing becomes this gray cloud of dubious loyalties and half-truths where he's got to figure out who wants him alive and who wants him dead. There's so much to love about this movie. There's so many great actors in it. You got Liev Schreiber, you got Vince D'Onofrio, Zoe Kravitz, fucking Regina King, and much like Hank himself, I could literally never guess what was going to happen next in this one. And at the center of all the crazy nonsense, you get a surprisingly grounded, relatable, poignant story about a small town kid in a big city who's just trying to recover from alcoholism and build a better life for himself after getting over a really traumatic injury that's messed with his self-perception. I just loved it. I thought this movie was terrific. I think everybody should watch this movie. This is a movie for people who like movies, if that makes sense. Number 7, If I Had Legs, I'd Kick You. I'm ashamed to say this movie had to get put on my radar. I hadn't heard of it until somebody told me I should watch it. Let's rewind for a second. Remember when I said watching Die My Love made me wonder how you could make a movie about repetition and monotony slowly driving you crazy without the movie itself being repetitive and monotonous? This is the answer. This movie is the answer I was talking about earlier. In some ways, this was the scariest movie I saw this year, even though it didn't really have a ton of horror beats. It did have like a couple of effective moments, but that's not why. The effectiveness of this film comes from its relentless depiction of the accumulation of stresses and annoyances building up in everyday life, particularly when you feel like nobody around you is really listening to you or even seeing you. And again, I always love watching TV shows and films written or directed by women because sometimes the best way to communicate your experience is through art. Maybe not even sometimes, maybe often. Like for me, the big one that woke me up to a woman's perspective what that would look like on screen was Tuca and Birdie. Don't laugh, if you've seen it, you know. And the big way director Mary Bronstein chose to get her point across, like the big thing I noticed about this movie was its use of sound. Repetitions of harsh, grating sounds, overlapping dialogue, like this movie starts to like stab at your brain in a genuinely unpleasant way. And the movie being unpleasant in that way is very pleasant because it's effective, if that makes sense. And the acting in this movie goes a long way towards that too, with the passive aggressiveness and frustration and all that rage just building up like a powder keg. See, except in this movie, we actually get to see those emotions boil over and affect the people around our main character. Our main character, Linda, is played by Rose Byrne, and she gave one of my favorite performances this year. And as her mental state deteriorates, so too does the structure of the world around her, as things descend further and further into chaos. I mean, Linda is already a full-time caretaker to her daughter who's dealing with a feeding disorder. Also, some surprisingly good performances from A$AP Rocky, who I mentioned as being probably the best part of the Spike Lee joint, and Conan O'Brien, who was playing a character so serious and vaguely creepy that I didn't even know that it was him for a little while. And what makes this kind of a movie even worse is that it's like you know somebody who has dealt with this situation or currently is. Just this non-stop waking nightmare of inescapable obligation in this world that we're all caught up in. And finally, the cinematography itself was extremely creative too. Like the movie played with the idea of how the characters are shown or not shown on screen and how that reflects the state of Linda. That's all I could really say about this movie without spoiling it. Maybe I'll do a smaller video that's a breakdown of it at some point. I don't know. I just feel very strongly that this movie really deserves more fans than it has. Number 6, One Battle After Another. I feel like this is probably going to make everybody's top 10 list this year. I know for a lot of people this is going to be number 1 or 2 or 3, but hey, it made it on the top 10. It's number 6. That's something. Now, again, they really got to get better at making trailers. It's always either show you the entire film or show you so little of the film that you have no idea what the movie's even actually about. This is maybe the only film where I sat down to write about it and words failed me. I couldn't say anything about this movie off the top of my head because it's so big and long and so much happens in it. I mean, there's the obvious surface level stuff like anti-fascism and resistance against government overreach, and like just the fact that it's a terrific adventure story with so many moving parts. I've made a point of summarizing a lot of the films on this list, but I don't think I'm going to do that with this one because it's just so dense. Like, you better be paying attention the whole 2 hours and 42 minutes because something pivotal happens every 3 to 5 minutes. Not only that, but this movie is more like a collection of smaller movies. Like, there are multiple inciting incidents and multiple points of resolution, so it makes it difficult to talk about any part of this movie without spoiling it, if that makes sense. Thank goodness the local theater I saw this movie at had a bathroom right next to the theater. Shout out the Loft, man. I had to go so bad during this one really incredible scene. I said to myself, okay, as soon as this scene's done, I'm going. And of course the scene was like a 20-minute uninterrupted continuous shot. There's of course a lot more that the movie deals with. Masculinity and shame in regards to sexuality, racism, the white power structure and how it uses people, racial identity politics, and perhaps my favorite part of this movie of all was the different ways that resistance can look. Like, this movie has both sides of the spectrum. If you're just looking for a crazy adventure movie, this is probably the best one you could watch. But if you're also looking for a lot of social subtext, you'll find it with this movie in spades. I may get into spoilers a little bit with this one, so Sean, if you don't want to hear about them. All I'll say is that this movie did live up to the hype, and for anybody who says it's the best movie of the year, I'm not gonna argue with them. Alright, so let's talk about Sean Penn's character, Sergeant Lockjaw, who to me is the most interesting character in the film. He's the one who's being pulled in the most directions, and you could read that as just like fun movie drama, but it's very rooted in real issues. Was his professed love of black girls ever genuine, or was it just fetishization? Was his desire to join the Christmas Adventurers Club born out of his love for a black woman? Like, he thought that if he joined this white supremacist organization, he'd be able to purify himself? Or did he join in spite of that love? Like, obviously in the end, he made his choice on where he stood. He was prepared to execute a child to get rid of the evidence of his interracial dalliances. But for a while, he seemed genuinely conflicted, to the point where I thought that maybe he joined the Christmas Adventurers Club to destroy them from the inside. And then the image of his dead body in that gas-filled office was so powerful to me, because, like, look at the lengths that this man went to stand with these white supremacists who wanted nothing to do with him. Like, the evidence of them trying to kill him is on his face. And in the end, he was still killed, and in a way directly evocative of Nazis. All he did was sleep with a person of color, and that was enough to have him killed. That's how deep white supremacy runs. And with all of the different forms of resistance we see throughout the film, it seemed even more likely that he was going to flip and exist in solidarity with the black woman he claimed to love. Like, think about it. You've got Benicio del Toro's character essentially running a Latino underground railroad. You've got Sensei students skateboarding around posing as delinquents, but are actually highly organized and collecting information. You've got Willa's friends, well, most of Willa's friends, covering for her when they get pressed by the cops. You've got Avanti Q seeing this innocent child and deciding to overcome years of conditioning and being beaten down and subsumed by the white power machine to do what he thought was right. All these different people at different levels of an oppressive society, all resisting in the ways that they know how. I think that was the big thing that made this movie resonate with so many people. Not just how good it was, but just how much, like, the sheer amount that there was to unpack with it. It is really, really good. It really is. At number 5, 40 Acres. Would you believe me if I told you the first time I heard about this movie was the day I went to see it? Like, I went to see Megan 2.0 and I wanted to double feature it with something else. Like, I actually double featured a lot of the movies on this list, but this was the only other thing playing at that theater that sounded interesting to me that day, so I went to check it out, and I'm very glad that I did. This movie rocked so hard. I can't even tell you how hard it rocked, but I'm gonna try. What you get here is, in essence, a post-apocalyptic zombie survival film, but with a few crucial differences. One, the lone holdout group is actually a family, a mixed black American and indigenous family, operating on land in Canada that was bought by African Americans following the First Civil War. I say first because in this universe there was a second fictional Civil War that kind of kickstarted all the bullshit. 2, the zombies aren't zombies, they're just humans that chose to become cannibals after a fungal infection wiped out most of the world's food supply, meaning both livestock and crops. And with just this very basic premise, the film firmly establishes what it and a lot of other movies were about this year: resistance against people who want to take your shit from you. 2 big things that made this movie work as well as it did were inter-character dynamics and world building. The detail of the family's hierarchy, the depictions of their day-to-day workings, the tensions and difficulties of working unconditionally with people upon whom you depend for your survival, and vice versa. It ultimately ended up being one of the most exciting and engaging watches I had this year. And don't get me wrong, there's plenty of action too. Even some pretty good, like, actually genuinely disturbing zombie-esque horror scenes. Man, this movie was harrowing, involved, detailed, convincing, and unexpectedly really, really cool. Just a great time. Number 4, weapons. Yes, I recognize a lot of my top 10 are horror films. Whatever. I like horror. I've talked about it on this channel quite a bit. Get over it. And we're in the middle of a horror renaissance. There's a lot of good horror films coming out right now. I can't be blamed for that. Not to mention, if you've seen this movie, you know why I have it so high. It's not about it being scary or socially poignant or this meditation on where we're at and where we're headed. It's just a really, really intriguing and interesting story that unfolds and expands in the most exciting and engaging way possible. The big gimmick of this movie is that it is constantly switching perspectives between a bunch of people in the town to gradually reveal further plot points about the mystery of what's going on. But it isn't just like a fun memento-y gimmick, it's actually used as an important storytelling device. Of everything I saw this year, this film epitomizes the rule of show don't tell. Pretty much every big reveal, every new piece of information, every new variable added into the mystery is shown to us directly from the perspective of the people involved. You'll come to the end of one character's chapter, get hit with a nasty surprise, and then immediately get shoved into another character's chapter that shows us the events leading up to that nasty surprise. So we're constantly being given these little tidbits, these little tasty morsels that we're cutting away from and then getting the context on. So it's a great way to keep your interest piqued. And probably as you get deeper and deeper into the movie, get piqued even further. It's constantly whetting your appetite like you're being served sampler platters and sliders. Oh man, it's just so good. And then they bring out the rest of the meal after getting you excited to try the dish. That's what this movie is. It's like being served a really nice 5-course meal. A really coherent, patient, elaborate, careful, balanced 5-star meal. I really can't recommend this movie highly enough. It's to the point where even if you're not a horror fan, I feel like you're doing yourself a disservice not watching this one. Number 3, The Long Walk. By this point in the video, some of you may have guessed this one was going to be this high. And I'm going to illustrate the quality of this movie to you by showing you this. What is this? It is the original Long Walk book by Stephen King that I bought because I was so enthralled and obsessed with this story after seeing the movie. I just had to get more of it. You know, the last time I did that, bought the book that a movie was adapted from because I was that obsessed with the story? I'll tell you, never. Let me tell you something. If you plan to watch this one, have a box of tissues at the ready. The premise of this one is as basic as it could possibly be. In a dystopian future, 50 boys, one from each state, all voluntarily participate in the long walk. You must walk at a speed of 3 miles an hour, no stopping, no breaks, and if you stop more than 3 times for long enough, you get your ticket to the afterlife. The idea to make this particular story into a movie is genius, and it reminds me a lot of the conceit of Breaking Bad, where the moment the first episode ends, you know how the whole show is going to end. So it's not the ending that matters, it's the journey of how you get there. Not to mention it puts the whole show and all the events of it on a clock, which automatically ups the stakes. And similarly, every character in this film is on a ticking clock that all they can try and do is outlast. But here's the problem for you, the viewer. The longer any given character remains in the long walk, the more attached you're going to get to them, the more you come to understand them, and the harder it's going to be for you when they finally, inevitably, inescapably get their ticket. It is an absolutely diabolical way of creating emotional investment in a movie that is almost akin to like a slasher film, which I say because you go in knowing that pretty much everybody is going to die. But it still kicks like a mule with its balls duct taped every time it happens. Yeah, sorry, I've still got Breaking Bad on the brain, I guess. You're also, interestingly enough, watching a movie that is in essence a bottle film. The movie spans quite a stretch of land, but the characters themselves, huddled together, making jokes, becoming friends, shooting the shit, they are very much trapped in a room with no walls, one for which the price of escape is death. And the movie is constructed and written like a bottle film too, where if you've seen that kind of movie, you know that it is the prime vehicle for a character piece. All the action and narrative interest and big reveals come strictly from character dialogue because, well, if they're not going anywhere, there's nothing else for them to do but talk. Now, if you haven't read the book, a lot of the dialogue from the movie is taken directly from the book, but, and I can't believe I'm saying this, the movie is a much, much, much kindler and gentler and more hopeful film than the book that it is based on. By which I mean the boys are much more explicitly interested in becoming friends and encouraging each other. They have empathy, they root for one another. I mean, God's sake, when the first kid goes down, our main character, Ray Garrity, actually helps him continue to walk for a little while longer. As amazing of a book as it is so different from the movie because the kids are so unbelievably callous and cruel that it almost starts to feel like Ray Garrity and Peter McVries are already dead and they're just hanging out with all these demons. This movie is no goddamn joke. Shout out to David Johnson, who many of us here in America, I'm sure, probably know for having played the synthetic Andy in 2024's Alien movie. Man, that dude was unbelievable in this film. He wore every emotion on his sleeve. You could feel everything. His joy, his hope, his desperation, his anger, his desolation. Like, you could have the most dire story in the world, which this definitely is. But if the performances aren't there, nobody's gonna be bought in. Like, the way everybody was acting in this movie made me feel like Francis Lawrence himself was behind the camera with an actual carbine. Like, everybody left it all out there. The performances were incredible in this movie. Now, this dude won an award for a movie this year I have not seen called Waste Man, and he was so good in The Long Walk that I'm probably just going to start checking out everything else he's done. So maybe after I check that out, I'll post a video of it, because holy shit, please hire this man for more movies. I will just say this. As we approach number 2, I'm sure most of you are not going to be surprised by what my number 1 film is. That said, the film I have in number 2 completely blindsided me as to how much I enjoyed it, to the point where for a while I considered it and my very obvious number 1 to be tied. So, and anyway, that number 2 is, drum roll, Marty Supreme. I'll say this of Timothée Chalamet. That dude knows the value of word of mouth. He probably knew that trailer wasn't going to make anybody want to see this movie. I mean, hell, I like Josh Safdie. I liked Uncut Gems, same as anybody. But that trailer did not look particularly interesting to me. You know, and then Chalamet got out there on the press tour and he started running his mouth about top-level shit this and generational performer that. And people don't like when you're a braggart, right? Whether you can back it up or not, people want you to be humble. So then I got curious and said, well, let me check it out. And look, I can't lie. I can't be mad. It was indeed some top-level shit. The question can be asked, did he really deserve to win Best Actor? Because as much as I loved this movie, his acting is not the thing that sold the movie for me. It was just a really interesting movie. And again, I'm not even really here to talk about that. I'm here to talk about the film overall, which was really good. It is definitely a Josh Safdie movie. Anybody who's watched Uncut Gems will be reminded of it throughout this film. Essentially, you're watching a steady stream of chaos about an aspiring table tennis player with huge aspirations. And he goes through a lot of the same beats as Adam Sandler's character in Uncut Gems. He's back and forth, he's scheming, he's often trying to get over on people, he's fast talking. He's constantly ready to risk it all on the surety of his skill alone. In fact, the irony of Chalamet being in a movie like this while the primary activity he partook of on the press tour was boasting about how great he was in the film is not lost on me because, and this is not a spoiler, not really, this is a movie about humility, or rather somebody finding humility. This is a movie about what you think is important versus what actually is. It explores ideas of friendship, fulfillment, commitment, and creating peace amongst all the noise that is life and trying to achieve. And Safdie frames it in the context of this huge, sprawling epic that takes you everywhere from the seediest, scummiest bars to the highest and most prestigious stages in the world. Now look, again, Chalamet's acting is not what sold me on this movie. Even if he had just been good in it instead of great, the movie still would have been awesome, just on the strength of its construction alone. This is one of those where all the parts were working in tandem, like a well-oiled machine. Tyler the Creator, you had Gwyneth Paltrow, and you had Odessa Zion, and all of them were great in this, I thought. It may be a bit much for some, by which I mean literal sensory overload, but I was shocked how exultant I felt walking out of the theater after this one. I didn't expect to like this one nearly as much as I did. It is definitely worth watching. And now number 1, surprising no one, is Flight Risk. Just kidding. If you spent any time on this channel at all, you knew this was coming. It's the obvious choice, it's the easy choice, and yes, it is my choice. And yes, part of my enjoyment of it is just how much I care about blues and black music and American art and all that stuff I've done tons of videos on this channel about. There might be other movies on this list that are better than Sinners from a filmmaking perspective, but that's a might. That's not a definite. And again, all of this is just my subjective opinion at the end of the day. Now, I know what some of you are thinking. You wouldn't like it as much if it wasn't black people. That's racist. You're racist. Here's the thing, goobers. You couldn't make this movie without black people, because the music and folk art of black people, the blues, is the entire point of the film. You want to know how I think we get rid of racism? I think we talk way too much about phenotype and not enough about culture. And I think the same thing about white cultures too. Czech, Irish, Scottish, Slovakian, German, Mediterranean. And that's a big part of what I loved about this movie, was how explicitly cross-cultural it was. And how central that was to the movie's ideas about music as a communing, ritualistic healing process. Now, I will say something that I haven't already said. Let me address the big non-point that this movie's detractors like to shout all the time. It's just Dusk Till Dawn. It's a ripoff of Dusk Till Dawn. Dusk Till Dawn did it first. Hey, you know who else ripped something off? Elvis. He said so himself. Y'all still call him the king, though. So, please, explain this to me. I implore you. If Sinners ripped off of Dusk Till Dawn, how is that any different or worse from Elvis Presley ripping off of the black musicians that he ripped off of to do his stuff? But let's put all that aside. Let me just get into the movie on the level of filmmaking. Because even there's a lot of very impressive stuff at work. The Michael B. Jordan playing 2 characters, the custom rig that they built to make that happen, these really amazing wide landscape shots, the soundtrack taking all of these very basic themes and running them through these different permutations that kind of just pulse and transform throughout the film. The gradual introduction of this extended cast of characters, all bound for that ill-fated party at the juke joint that night, which, just aside from being stylish and funny and beautifully shot and immersive, is also a great way to do something that the vast majority of horror films like this fail to do. They made me actually care about the cast before they got killed off. So when Cornbread gets turned and you have that iconic scene of him trying to get back in, you can appreciate that scene fully. The comedy, the horror, the tension, the uneasiness, all of it, it hits because we took the time to get used to these characters and their typical dynamic. When Remick threatens Grace and Beau's daughter, we feel that. We feel Grace's sadness and horror and confusion at what her husband has become because we've spent time with all these people. Most horror films with a high body count just kind of treat their characters as meat puppets, but this was a movie that actually respected its cast enough to let them be real characters. I won't bore you too much. I know I've talked about this movie a ton already, but hey, I mean, if you guys decide that you like these more analytical movie videos, I will do more of them, especially since I intend to see more movies this year. And I feel really good about this ranking list. I mean, I thought on it long and hard. It's the first ranking list like this I've ever done. It probably won't be the last, though. Because again, I plan on seeing even more movies this year, so if you liked this video, look forward to another one about a year from now. And I'll see y'all on the next one, whatever that is.